I seek leave to have this question held over until the Minister of Finance is present in the chamber on the grounds that the material is both technical and important to the status of South Canterbury Finance under the Retail Guarantee.
Leave is sought for that course of action. Is there any objection? There is objection. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, to the Minister of Finance. Did the Treasury evaluate the net effect on South Canterbury Finance's position of the February 2010 acquisition of Helicopters New Zealand Ltd and Scales Corporation shares, including the effect of the transaction on the recoverability or impairment of South Canterbury Finance's $75 million loan to its parent company, Southbury Group Ltd?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, yes. In this transaction, the assets mentioned were to be acquired by South Canterbury Finance and paid for by the issue of shares. Under the terms of the deed of guarantee, such transactions can proceed where a Crown-approved independent expert provides written certification that the transaction is on arm's-length terms. In February 2010, South Canterbury Finance approached the Treasury about the transaction. Treasury approved separate experts to review each transaction and received favourable responses on the 28th of February. The Treasury review of the transaction was that at worst it made no difference to the Crown. It boosted the equity in South Canterbury Finance but lessened the equity in Southbury by an equal amount. That view has proven correct, and I do not believe the cost to taxpayers was impacted by this transaction.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
To the Minister. Why did the independent reports provided to Treasury by Simmons Corporate Finance and Northington Partners, certifying that the acquisitions by South Canterbury Finance of Helicopters New Zealand and Scales Corporation were on arm's-length terms as stated in SCF's Prospectus 61, why did they not also include an evaluation of the effect on pre-existing loans and exposures to Southbury Group and on South Canterbury Finance's position as prior charge secured guarantor of Southbury Corp's pre-existing convertible notes?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I can only confirm again that under the terms of the deed of guarantee, such transactions can proceed where a Crown-approved independent expert provides written certification that the transaction is on arm's-length terms. And that was the basis for which the independent experts were asked to look at the transactions. As I said in the answer to the previous question, the Treasury view of the transaction was that it made, at worst, no difference to the Crown by boosting the equity in South Canterbury Finance but lessening the equity in Southbury by an equal amount.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, in reaching the conclusion that the transaction made, quote, no difference to the Crown, did the Treasury consider whether, after the acquisition, Southbury Group and Southbury Corp would be in a position to repay their loans to South Canterbury Finance?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, once again, the Treasury was in the position of evaluating its view of the transaction in terms of the exposure of taxpayers, which was their focus throughout this exercise, and it was in their assessment that the movement of those assets into South Canterbury was at worst neutral in terms of the return of the exposure that the Crown had under the Deposit Guarantee Scheme.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, let me try again. In the event, to the Minister,
Order.
In the event...
Order. Comments perhaps are unhelpful, but the member is asking a serious set of questions, and it's important they be heard clearly. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, in the event that those loans were not able to be repaid, how could it possibly be that the net impact of that series of transactions was neutral?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, when I went to school, all those things had to be assessed on the basis of the balance sheet of the companies, and the reality is that Treasury was in the position of having to make recommendations to the Crown based on its knowledge of the companies and the various loans that the member speaks of. And in their view, The movement of those assets would at worst have a neutral impact on South Canterbury Finance and the equity of South Canterbury Finance, and that's the advice they gave the government.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, how can both his statements to the House on 15 September be true? First, that a significant proportion of the $831 million provisioning in the 30 June 2009 Crown accounts was related to South Canterbury Finance, and his second statement the same day that work done on statutory management and receiverships options for South Canterbury Finance, quote, probably did not occur until this year, close quote. And can he therefore clarify to the House when did work start on statutory management or recapitalisation options for South Canterbury Finance?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the Treasury assessment of the impairment to the Crown's accounts that could be caused by the deposit guarantee scheme was in place, as the member knows, in August 2009. I don't have any information to hand that suggests that any of the discussions in relation to statutory management or anything else are different from what the Minister previously has advised the House.
Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I fear that the Minister may have inadvertently misled the House because he's just told... Mr. Speaker, serious point of order.
I accept the member plans to raise a serious point of order, but he shouldn't preface it that way. I'll listen to the issue of order.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has just told the House that those provisionings were made in August 2009, but they were in the Crown's accounts to 30 June 2009. Both statements cannot be correct at the same time.
I appreciate the member is raising a serious issue, but he can't litigate the answer by way of point of order. And the member, the member could seek a further supplementary question from his team and question the Minister specifically on that issue. I hear the issue the member's raising, and he could use another supplementary question to explicitly question the Minister on that. Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table prospectus number 60 of South Canterbury Finance Ltd dated 20 October 2009, which sets out the relevant background and provisions on the Scales Corp and helicopter transactions identified earlier.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Question number 7, Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.